Hello and welcome to Talk Story to Me. Today I'm so happy to talk to you about Zootopia. On Saturday my husband and I actually got the chance to go and take a day off. It has been, I think the last day that we actually got to take completely off was in October or November. It's just been one of those years. So this was a great deal of fun. We got to see Zootopia and another movie, which I will review later, and also this review gets interrupted, other than by Thor, who is sitting here just out of camera range. I stole my husband's tie, and James hasn't realized it yet, so I'm gonna see how long I can get away with wearing this tie. I got it right off of him. He was so obsessed with something, so focused with something else, that if I suddenly disappear, that's why it's really not a good idea to have something that people can just, Anyway, back to the case at hand. Zootopia. As far as biases go, well, let's see, that's a little bit of a trickier one this time. I don't really know that I have any that make me less inclined to like this movie or like it more. I enjoy Disney movies, but there have also been a number of Disney movies that I dislike. I suppose I could say that Disney animation is something I've admired a long time. I think it's really pretty amazing, and they often cross into art, not just entertainment, and I enjoy that. But that's about all. Now, Zootopia was a movie that I have heard really nothing but good about, and I was a little bit concerned because I heard the same thing about Frozen, and I wound up being discouraged and disappointed in the movie. Not that it's a bad movie, but it's definitely overhyped, and well, yeah, never mind. This isn't about Frozen. This is about Zootopia. And I was extremely pleased to find that I thoroughly enjoyed this movie. It is one of the best animated movies that I've seen in a long while, and it's proof that a kid's movie doesn't have to be light on substance. Though, who would ever suggest that? No, you don't do that. That's just an excuse to not give kids good content. And that's definitely not the case here. So the story revolves around a young rabbit named Judy Hopps who desperately wants to be a cop. She wants to be the first rabbit cop in the entire history of Zootopia. She lives in a place where predators and prey live in harmony, and the central city is known as Zootopia. Oops, Thor, stop that. Now, she gets there, and she has to fight pretty hard to get there, which was a really nice addition. Dreams don't just happen by wishing. Definitely doesn't happen like that here. But once she gets there, she realizes that there's some problems, and one of them is that there are missing mammals, and there is some mystery that's developing, and she manages to work from being a meter maid and gets in to get solving this case, and she gets more than she bargained for. Part mystery, lots of adventure, and lots of fun. So first I want to start with the animation and the world building. It's really, really good. I expect a lot out of Disney animation, so I do hold them to a higher standard, I suppose, than another animating studio that doesn't have the kind of track record that Disney does. It's one of the things they're known for, and they live up to it here. The best way I can describe it is intricate and vivid. It feels quite well realized, and this is a world that feels lived in. It didn't seem just sort of haphazard like it could have. And really, there are so many different locations here, and they take advantage of them without making the movie feel rushed. It's another cat, don't worry. I'm not. Oh. See you later, Thor. Anyway, the animation itself is absolutely incredible. It's incredibly smooth and realistic, while it still, of course, is a cartoon. And if you haven't seen it, or if you want to see it again, or just pull up the previews, pay attention to things like the fur, because you know how this sort of, it moves. Like mine is incredibly dry and brittle right now, but there's texture to it. It changes, and as I drop it, things change. Well, this animation reflects that, and it reflects it really, really well. And it's stunning. I really try not to let the artistic style of a movie sway me, but even if the story hadn't been good, they probably would have gotten a lot of points from me just based on how lush and full this looks. So, well done. Also excels at the distinction between anthropomorphized animals and feral animals. Was quite well done in that regard. And the transformations, if you've seen the previews, you know what I'm talking about, and I'm not giving away spoilers, but the transformations are really quite disturbing in a good way. It creates the feeling that you want. Now, yeah, I have time for this. Something that I found also pretty fascinating to look at in this is the evolution of Disney's animation. Now, if you were to pull up, say, the 1973 Disney Robin Hood, obviously animated anthropomorphic characters, and take some of the characters, say, the most obvious choice, Robin Hood, and set him next to Nick Wilde, voiced by Jason Bateman, it's pretty incredible looking at, first of all, how the characters have changed, and yet some of the things that have remained the same, what they've kept on. And I'm a little bit of a nerd when it comes to that sort of thing. I enjoy it. I like seeing the detailing and how the personality is there, and you can see Disney's roots and where they came from and how they're still holding on to that, even though the animation style has changed somewhat. So, just very interesting. And my husband, when we were watching it, pointed out a few other characters. And if you were to watch both of them back to back, I'm sure you'd notice a lot more. Now, as far as the story, the tone, and the themes, there's a lot to say here. I'm going to try to keep it brief. The story overall is really tight, and it's quite well developed. Certain aspects of it, of course, are quite familiar, like the dreamer who has to face opposition and all the people who want to crush her dreams and fight for her right to realize her dreams. That's been done quite a bit, but it works very well here. The characters in general are essentially what you would expect from a Disney movie. If I were to tell you what this is about, the characters are all pretty much what you would expect, at least in what I've seen with Disney. That doesn't mean they're not enjoyable. In this case, they still feel fresh, partially through the dialogue and through the way that they interact with one another. It's genuinely fun, and while I was sitting there, I wasn't thinking about, oh, this reminds me of this character that I saw from this movie, except for some of the similar appearances, but that's probably just me. Everyone in this gives a grade A performance in terms of the voice acting. I enjoyed every single one of them. Jennifer Goodwin as Judy Hopps, very, very good. Completely optimistic and determined and absolutely adorable, though not cute. Don't use the word cute. If you've seen the movie, you know why. And then, like I said, Nick Wilde, as voiced by Jason Bateman, also gives an excellent performance. I can't think of anyone who was in this who did a bad job with their voice. There's a lot of characterization, a lot of interesting quirks without them being only quirk-based personalities, so that was wonderful. Now, let me think. Well, yeah, let's go ahead and talk about the comedy, because there's a lot of humor woven throughout this. The theater was erupting in laughter at different points. In fact, there was one point where I couldn't hear the movie because people were laughing so hard, and I'm pretty sure some of them had seen the movie before because there were kids calling out the punchlines early. And, they avoid a lot of the low-hanging fruit for comedy, which was really quite refreshing. They went for some more original takes or build up and don't just go for the easy one. There were a few times when I thought I might predict the joke, and thankfully I didn't. Sometimes I did, but most of them were really pretty good. And really most of this humor is situational in nature, and that actually explains some of the previews. The first preview for Zootopia was not one that I liked at all. In fact, it didn't intrigue me whatsoever. Second one did better, and then I felt really good about going and seeing this movie. The other thing that works really well here is there are some great quotable lines which add to the humor and this tone and help the rewatchability. One of my favorites is, "He's right, I don't know when to quit." Apparently my husband thinks that applies to me too. Anyway, most of the themes of the story revolve around racism. Some people have suggested maybe it's sexism. I don't think that holds up, even though there's some places where it's a little applicable, but that's primarily because there are female characters who are on the force, and it focuses primarily on species expectations, and that holds true for every character in the story. So, what's interesting with this is that they never call it racism. They don't even have like a little punny name, which I really appreciated. Puns can be great for dealing with some things, but other things need to be left alone. You don't really joke about them. But they took these concepts and they broke them down in a way that doesn't paint one side as all bad or another side as all good, and that is also really accessible to kids, but even adults too. Simple doesn't mean it's too easy, nor does it mean that it's lacking in depth. And the way that they deal with the stereotypes in this was interesting. They show that some stereotypes are there for a reason. Doesn't mean that they're, and when I say for a reason, I mean that they act in a way that supports the stereotypes. Other stereotypes, the animals or the individuals respond in a way because that's what is expected of them. And then some stereotypes just aren't appropriate at all. They're completely false. And what it really comes down to is the individual. And there's a lot of discussions in this, and I think the core message really is getting to know people on an individual basis and not making assumptions about them based on what stereotypes tell you about that individual. Now, let's see. I am almost positive that every single character in this movie falls into the stereotyping trap. They all are the recipients of stereotypes and mischaracterizations, and they all do it themselves, which helps because even though there is a clear antagonist who makes its presence known, not everyone who stereotypes or acts on the stereotype is someone who is cruel or evil or even someone with bad intentions. There's actually there's one scene in particular where it's clear that it came about because it was easier. Heat of the moment. And you can, some people have said that the one character's reaction in response to this was a little bit extreme. However, given that character's backstory and what he had been through, it made sense to me that he responded that way. But what I liked with that is that nobody in that scene was entirely all wrong or entirely all right. There was that need to talk, there was that need for a dialogue, but at the same time, because of the individual hurts and the pain and histories, there was a lot more harm inflicted than was intended. And it's a good reminder that sometimes, even when we have good intentions, we sometimes hurt people, and we have to own up to that, and we have to deal with that and those consequences. So I thought that was handled really quite well. Now, let's go on to the weaknesses, because there were a few of those. One of them, in my opinion, was the character known as the Gazelle, voiced by Shakira. Now, it's not that this was a bad character, but I just felt that what this character added, and in terms of the time given, really wasn't that effective. It was just, she has a song, she says this little tiny speech later on in the movie, and I mean very small. It's not as if they waste a lot of time with her. And the character just feels like a generic modern pop character to me, and I would rather they had taken that out. I mean, maybe keep in the Try Everything song or something like that, or the clips or the end, but don't keep everything that they had in here in, and allow the story to have that time to address some of the other issues. And it's addressing these issues which is where the other weaknesses are. And again, this is moving almost into nitpicking territory, but I think that they are still fair criticisms. One of the things that needed to be addressed to make this even stronger, in my opinion, was what is the alternative for governments in terms of profiling and stereotyping. And this shows a method that works very well and should be taught for individuals. And actually, that connects very much to the innocent until proven guilty perspective that has so deeply influenced our own justice system. But part of the reason that we've slipped away from that is because of efficiency and many other reasons. I mean, people use the quote unquote greater good, concerns about the speed at which an attack can happen, and questions that were actually brought up in this movie. But because of how this problem is developed and how it ends up being resolved, it doesn't answer the larger question. Now, obviously, this is asking a lot of a kid's movie. A lot of adult movies don't even do this, so I can't really fault them for taking the easier way out on this. And maybe they'll address it in the sequel. There is going to be a sequel to Zootopia. Not sure what it's going to cover, but I hope it'll be just as good. So, really, it's just more of, I wish they'd taken that little bit of time to address it in the larger situation. However, again, this is dealing with younger kids, teenagers, and remembering to do this in your own personal life is really important, and we can figure out ways to do that in the government or the larger setting as well, and that might be it. That would be almost a whole other movie in and of itself, and I would definitely want to see that. Now, the other thing, and this is a criticism, but it's also an observation about our culture. There's a certain level of imprecision, and it's just started bothering me just a little bit. So, two situations in particular where this stood out to me in this movie were the first, where there's one of Shakira's songs called Try Everything. Nice, generic pop song about how people should try everything, because new experiences are great. And then at one point, Judy runs into this, what appears to be a baby fox, and he apparently wants to be an elephant when he grows up, and she just affirms that he'll make an excellent elephant because he can be whatever he wants to be when he grows up. And I've heard adults tell kids similar things. It's a little bit, I think it comes from a good place. Actually, I'm pretty sure it comes from a good place. People are trying to be encouraging and not be the chief bogos who, no, we all have limitations and you can't just be whatever you want. Wanting it doesn't make it so. However, even though this story later on brings up the issue through Chief Bogo and others that we all do have limitations, it also, well, it still is portraying this message, and in general it's a good message because it's talking about, most of the time I think how it's taken is don't limit yourself. So, it's not actually I'll just go the rest of the way. When I hear try everything or you can be anything, I know that they don't mean that. And if you automatically are getting annoyed with me and saying, oh, but I do believe you can be anything. No, because are you really telling someone, if you tell them you can be anything you want, are you really telling that person you can be an axe murderer or you can be an art thief? We automatically have limitations, and the fact is being more precise could lead to better conversations about it instead of just assuming that our kids will only want to do good things. It's one of those things that, try everything that's good. And with poetry it's particularly difficult, particularly if you're trying to find something that rhymes. That just, imprecision often works its way in. But in conversations with kids, like even with Judy talking to the baby fox, it could have been something like, well, I think you make a really cute elephant right now, or even something like, let's see, this is a hard one. Maybe that sounds like an amazing dream, or I'm sure you're going to be something incredible when you grow up. I don't know. Just, in my mind, it potentially comes across as a lie and just working on being more precise with language. But again, this is more of musing on my part. One other small thing to note in this is the appropriateness for children. All in all, I do think that this is a movie for families, and it has a lot of content in it that's great for everybody. However, while we were in the theater, there were a few very intense sections, and there were children screaming and crying who had to be removed. I think most of them were under the age of 4 or 5, but it's hard to be sure in a dark theater. And here's where I think you might be able to tell. It's in these sections where these anthropomorphic animals are starting to go feral. If you've seen the previews, then you know some of what I'm talking about. And if you haven't seen the previews and you have young kids, I'd recommend you check out those previews. You'll see a couple clips of that. These scenes are not the absolute most intense, but they give you a good benchmark. Also, note that some of the characters have glowing eyes when they're in their feral states. I know as a kid that terrified me, but if your child has problems with that sort of thing, you might want to be cautious and maybe take a pass on it or be ready to close their eyes. None of the scenes show up. The atmosphere reflects that you're about to go into a scary scene. The sound effects indicate that something is coming. You're expecting a jump scare at those points, and you get just that. So just bear that in mind. But all in all, really, this was a great movie. Like I said, most of my issues were very minor and didn't detract from my enjoyment. They were more questions that I found myself pondering and wanting to discuss afterward, which isn't a bad thing. So I definitely recommend this movie. It's on my saw it, enjoyed it, and plan to see it at least a few times more. My husband and I obviously plan to buy this, and then later when we have kids, hopefully soon, we'll be able to show them this movie. So what about you? Have you seen this movie, and what did you think of it? And then what is your favorite deep kids movie? So I'll talk to you later, and guess what? I still have the time. Bye.